Am I in the viewfinder? How much leeway do I have here to move around? Because I'm going to use these boards probably.
Yep, that's okay.
Actually, I think you should operate the camera. I think you should just stand right there.
Maybe.
What do you think of that idea? One of these so I can figure out what it was that I said I was going to tell you. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and start. And I think maybe the first thing I'd like to do, since some of you probably don't know, a lot of you don't know each other, we're trained in different classes, different class times. Why don't we just take a minute to just go around and everybody introduce themselves and just say who you are and anything else you want us to know about you quickly, just so you can kind of know who else is in the room. Start out, what I want to do tonight is to spend some time talking about reality testing and exactly what it is and what you do it for and where you do it and how you do it and all those different things. I will tell you right up front that my approach to reality testing, or my philosophy of reality testing, is that there's no substitute for the basics. So I'm going to go through this thing with that in mind, that I want you to see how connected reality testing is to just doing good basic things in mediation and very careful setup and that sort of thing. We will cover some techniques or some skills that I use when I do cases that I think are very effective, and there'll be some that we won't cover. I also take the philosophy that there are no silver bullets in mediation. It's a lot of hard work. There are no silver bullets. We're not going to have any here tonight, but hopefully we will cover a few skills that you will find very useful and I think powerful when you do cases out in the courts or wherever it is that you have to be mediated here at CCR. Just talk a little bit about the purposes of reality testing and mediation. And I want to cover that sort of broadly. The CCR model usually gets thought of as a facilitated model. I like to call it the facilitated model, and that's over and compared against an evaluative model. One thing that's a problem in the mediation world is the semantics of mediation will drive you crazy. And I can absolutely tell you that if you put 30 or 40 long-time experienced mediators in this room, you ask each one of them what facilitated means and what evaluative means, you get 40 different answers. So we just have to say right up front, that's a problem. We know it's a problem. We'll just have to kind of work around that. I think that there are two criticisms of old-time, long-time criticisms of mediation. Probably the oldest criticism is that mediation is reductionist. It reduces all conflict to a communication problem. People just don't communicate well. You, the mediator, come in, you help them communicate well, and voila. They're able to get past their dispute, get an agreement, get on with their life. I believe that is reductionist. I think that there's more to disputes, more to most disputes than just bad communication. Now, it's in there a lot of times. It's usually in there to some degree. There's usually some poor or bad communication or miscommunication involved in a dispute, but there's also usually a number of other things. The other sort of long-time criticism is that of certain kinds of mediation is that they're evaluative, and what they really hinge on is the idea that parties just don't know what to do, and they need help. Your parties need somebody to tell them what to do. They need an opinion, they need advice, they need somebody to basically evaluate their case in the course of the mediation. I also think that's reductionist. That can be true. There needs to be some evaluative component in their own analysis of the case, but it's not all there is. You interject an evaluative component into the mediation without doing any of the other facilitative things, and you've got the same problem. You're reducing it down to one point when there are many other things involved. The CCR model, I think, the model that we use, which used to be on the wall, isn't on the wall, but you all know it by heart, right? I could ask any one of you, and you can click that model off just like that, right? Good. I think the CCR model is someplace in here. Anybody want to guess why it's not all the way over on the facilitative end of things? Anybody know why that is? Lorna?
Because it's pretty directive about the process.
That's one reason, one very good reason. You are very directive about the process. You, the mediator, pretty much tell people what the process is, what they'll be doing, and when. So that's pretty directive. The other big reason is what? Gene, do you know?
I think when you do reality testing, you're making some kind of evaluation in order to formulate the question.
Exactly. In other words, part of the issue is that it becomes evaluative to some degree, maybe not a lot, because you, the mediator, are deciding what questions get asked and what don't, which ones don't, and because you, the mediator, are asking them, through the questions that you ask your parties, to evaluate various aspects of their case or their issue. That's exactly what you're doing. So this model really depends very heavily on an evaluative component, and that evaluative component is the reality testing piece. Now, it's not R-E-A-L-I-T-Y, testing. 1, 2, 3. It's not all the way over here on this evaluative side. How come? Because you're not going to tell parties, here's what I see as the strengths or weaknesses of your case. Or I think you've got a bad case. Or I think you should consider X. I think you need to go back and think about doing this. Right? You're not going to give them that really sort of direct advice or opinion either early on or even late in the mediation. You're not going to say, here are things I think you should do. Nothing like that. So you're not going to be way over here. Now, if you're familiar with the mediation world, you know there are a lot of people who are way over here. They'll give advice, they'll give opinions. Now, some of the really good evaluative mediators might not do that to way, way, way into the game, toward the tail end of the mediation. They might do a lot of facilitative things, then move to the much more evaluative things. But there are plenty of them out there who do that. Under the CCR model, we really don't. We stick with this as our evaluative component, the reality testing piece. But the important thing to grasp out of that is that in this model, if you don't do the reality testing, it's a big problem. This model really hinges on that evaluative piece being done through the reality testing, having the parties do their own evaluation, so you're helping them with questions to consider. So yes, it's evaluative to some degree, not terribly evaluative. And your model really wouldn't work very well if you didn't do it. I've seen people who mediate well in all the other ways. All the other aspects of their mediation are good, but their reality testing is poor. And they're not very effective, because under this model, without effective reality testing, you just won't get very far, usually. Okay, so having said that, what does reality testing do? Well, one thing it does is it tests and prioritizes needs and interests. You spend a lot of time working with needs and interests, and where do you spend most of that time? In the crosstalk. In the CCR model, you're going to do a whole lot of work with needs and interests in the crosstalk, using those open-ended questions, breaking things down, really digging for needs and interests. When you get into the caucus portion of it, which is where you typically do your reality testing, and we're going to talk about in a minute why you do it there, just to be clear about that. One of the things you're going to do is really get those needs and interests solid and clear. You're going to test to make sure that's really what they need and want. You've heard them correctly. You've gotten down to the bottom line. This is what they need. It's what Michael Cohn, one of our longtime trainers, calls hardwiring the needs and interests. You get them out, then you reality test them to be sure you've got the real thing and you're clear about that. And to some degree, it prioritizes needs and interests, because you can have a lot of needs and interests and there can be a priority to them. And sometimes people in the mediation will be faced with hard choices. What are my priorities here? Out of all these needs and interests that I have, what does it make sense for me to go after in this mediation? And are there other things that I'm going to have to let ride here in order to get the most important things? So you help them prioritize it as well. The second thing you do is you test the feasibility of the option. Now, they had options probably on the table. One way of looking at positions is, When a person comes into the room with a position, I will do X and I won't do Y, as an option. My option is to pursue X and not to pursue Y. Part of what you're going to do is reality test that. You're going to test the feasibility of that option to see if they can really do that. Right? You're going to help them to think through the option they're considering to see if that's a reality for them, if there's something they can do there, if they can really do it, they can really pursue it, they could really make it happen. Because if they can't, what happens then? That one's usually going to go. It's going to be off the table, and they're going to need to look for other ways to accomplish their goals. And that leads us to the third piece, which is to test the fit of the option to the needs and interests. One of the most important things is, once you've tested the feasibility of an option, is not to forget to ask in a number of different ways, does this really get you what you want? Because if it doesn't get you what you want, again, what happens? That option goes. Usually something else or some hybrid gets created in its place. If people have plan A on the table and they realize I either can't do plan A or plan A doesn't get me what I want, then it's time to start thinking up plan B. And that's typically part of the way movement happens in a mediation. So you're going to be checking to see if any particular option accomplishes the needs and interests that you've got hardwired, got solidly on the table. Now, we're going to talk about where you do that, how you set that up. Where you do it is very important. You can do mild, balanced reality testing probably anywhere. If it's very mild and it's very balanced. If it's going to be more than that, if it's going to be pointed and it's going to really cut to the chase, then it needs to be where? In the caucus. How come in the caucus? Why would you say only do it in the caucus?
People be apprehensive about showing their whole card.
Okay? One thing is you're likely not to get an answer or even get it considered because they're not going to be very forthcoming if the other party's there. What's kind of attached to all that? What kinds of things? Well, one thing is it may embarrass somebody, and what do you usually need to be embarrassed? Somebody to be embarrassed in front of, although I find I can be embarrassed even alone sometimes. It may cause a party to lie. It may make them feel so pressured and so put on the spot that they just have to cook something. I remember the Grinch and The Grinch That Stole Christmas, when little Cindy Lou Who comes out and asks him why he's taking the Christmas tree. What's his response? What do they say it was?
Fix the light.
He thought up a lie and he thought it up quick. And it's the same way in mediation. If you push them too hard in the wrong place, they'll think up a lie and they'll think it up quick, and then you'll have to live with that lie for the next 3 or 4 or 5 hours. Because they're not about to tell you they lied, right? It may cause your party to just walk out or get very disengaged, out of the loop for all intents and purposes. It can erode your rapport and trust with the person that you're really putting on the spot. It can interestingly have the effect of eroding trust and rapport with the other person, because I have seen people come out of mediations and say, the mediator was very neutral to me, but they were not fair to the other person. Which is very interesting, right? When they say they weren't even fair to the other person, it kind of makes you wonder. It can give the appearance that you're not a neutral, of course. And the sixth thing that's not on there, but it's a really important thing, is just the practicality of what happens when you do really powerful reality testing in a joint session. Let's say you reality test with your initiator and it's really good. It's a really good reality testing question. It really just kind of pulls the rug out from under everything. And they move a little bit this way. Where does your respondent go? The other way. All you did was entrench them in their position. They won't come this way. It just entrenches them further off on the side. You don't want it to have that effect, obviously. You want it to have the effect of moving them together. want it to have the effect of keeping them on the position, but moving them off the position onto needs and interests. So those are the main reasons why you wouldn't do it, or those are the main risks. So the question becomes whether you do it in the crosstalk or in the caucus. And what I've done for most of my mediation career is just not taking that risk. Unless it's very mild and very balanced reality testing, I almost always opt for putting it in the caucus. Because it's not worth the, because it would have the same power in the caucus, and it's not worth the risk that you take in the crosstalk. If you look at that list of risks, a lot of that really dissipates when you get into the caucus. They're not as likely to be embarrassed. They're more likely to be open with you. They're not as likely to think that you're not being neutral, because you're with them, working their issue.
Yeah, and
Tony.
what do you mean, balance? Is this something that apply to both parties?
Yeah. If I can either ask a question that applies to both parties, or I can nail one and then turn right around with just another breath and nail the other one. So if they're both stinging a little bit, if you will, you can probably get away with that. But it shouldn't be. It should never be really pointed in a crosstalk, because I think you just run way too much risk of just blowing them both
But in
out.
the short form, the adaptive model.
Now, if you're talking about the short form, the answer is yes. You can do that. You can do that. You can do it right in front of both of them, and there balance becomes critical. Some people enjoy that. Rocky Perkovich would tell you he just loves sitting there flip-siding them right in front of one another, and reality testing them in front of one another. But the balance is a critical piece in the short model. And you know, that's a good point. I should have made allowance in this outline for when you're dealing in the short model, because most of you probably are over there now, right? How many people in here are doing the short model exclusively? How many of you are doing IDHR in the short model or CCR in the short model? Okay. More than I thought. I would have thought most of you would have been just at the courts. Now, the piece to keep in mind, the weight piece on that short model, you know, you can get by with a whole lot of things in the short model because of what? Time, and they're under the gun from the judge. They don't have a lot of, they can get mad if they want. They don't have a whole lot of options because the judge says, no, you're going to mediate. It's a little different over here where they can walk on it. But you should also think of the effect that it can have. If there's a way you can balance your reality testing, or you can frame your reality testing, you can phrase it, so that when you have both parties sitting there, that it really is likely to keep them balanced and to keep them in the room as opposed to knock them out of there, that's the way you want to go. For the same reasons, the same set of reasons, to keep them running the risk that you have. The risks are the same, whether you're in the short model or the long model. The question is just whether you're going to do it. Okay. Now, in terms of setting up reality testing, it's a very critical piece. And let me just say, the very first thing on the list is the crosstalk, because if you do a lousy crosstalk, you will get lousy reality testing. It is by definition pretty impossible to do good reality testing without the facts you need and without the needs and interests. What is it you're going to reality test without those two things? You might do some halfway decent reality testing of feasibility, but even that wouldn't be complete. Because if I'm reality testing a person on the feasibility, say, of trying and appealing a case, one thing I want to know is, do you got any staying power? You got the wherewithal to stay in court 2 or 3 years and pay attorneys and press this thing? And that's one of the things I can feel around and find out in my fact development in the crosstalk. I can do that. So it's a piece of information, any information that you need, that you're going to need to do the good reality testing, you got to get it developed ahead of time. Now, the other piece to that is to remember that what really drives mediation to a great extent is heightened awareness. It's heightened awareness. So do your fact development, your needs and interest stuff in your crosstalk so both parties see it. And then do your reality testing in the caucus where both parties don't see it. That's the way you want to balance it if you can. Now again, if you're in the short model, oh well. right? Stuffed tomatoes, you just got to do it right there. Building trust and rapport, you cannot do really good, hard-nosed reality testing without trust and rapport. They're not going to let you do it. They just aren't. If they don't like you and they don't trust you, they either don't trust your motivations, or they don't trust your neutrality, or they just think you're a jerk, they don't like your personality, these questions are going to fall so flat. You either won't get an answer, or you'll get a denial type of answer. They're not even letting you in their head. They're not even letting you ask the questions. So trust and rapport is something you build from the time you walk in the door. From the first time you look at them, say hello, shake their hand, until this point when you're about ready to reality test them in the caucus, that's a thing that you work through. The more you can work that trust and rapport, the better. In fact, I would say that, if there are 2 or 3 things you could have in mediation, and you couldn't have anything else, that'd be on the list. That'd be high on the list. Give me the trust and rapport with the parties, because they'll let you do a lot of things with good trust and rapport that they won't otherwise. And one of the things that you can do to build trust and rapport when you get into the caucus is to kind of slow things down, take a little bit of a relaxed approach, and to start off not by going right for the reality testing questions, but to start out talking about, so how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are things going? If there's an emotional piece you can work, do it. Sometimes I'll say to clients, my sense of things is this has been really tough for you. It's been hard. Tell me where you are. I noticed, they said this to you. How did you feel then? How do you feel about this aspect of it? If I know there's something they're really struggling with, it's hard for them, I will ask them to spend some time talking about it. I might say to them, I don't really know much about you. Tell me about you. Tell me about your life. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about what you do. Nathanson always does that. He would never do a mediation which y'all know Michael, right? Nathanson. He'd probably never do a mediation which during the caucus he didn't ask those questions. I don't know much about you. Tell me what you do. Talk about their kids. There's probably nobody in the world unwilling to talk about their children. In fact, people are all too willing, in my judgment, to talk about their children. But it's a good mediation technique. So those are trust builders, rapport builders. That's part of what I do even when I check for duress in a caucus, when I say, is there anything you didn't want to tell me? The other side sitting in here, it's a rapport piece. That's what it is. Sometimes it gets duress. Most times it just builds a little more rapport. Then you want to make sure that you set it up right by, of course, getting your confidentiality correct. And remember that your confidentiality in your opening statement as a mediator was a qualified confidentiality. You gave an exception. So if you reiterate your confidentiality at the beginning of a caucus, and we want you to do that, make sure you don't void the exception. Make sure you say something like, this is confidential just like the rest of the process. Don't ever promise blanket confidentiality because you can't give it. It'll get you in trouble. This is confidential like the rest of the process. I usually say I won't share anything that you ask me not to share. Now you can also say I won't share anything unless you tell me I can share it. Just be aware of the difference between those two statements. One is a very restrictive confidentiality. One is a very, very liberal, generous confidentiality. So just know which one you're dealing with and deal accordingly. So there's part of it, because confidentiality usually gets what? Talk. People are more likely to talk if they believe it's confidential. They're much more likely to share emotions. They're much more likely to cut to the chase. They're not going to be diplomatic anymore when it's confidential. They'll just tell you flat out, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I want to do, this is what I feel, this is what I think the other person's doing to me. It's good. Listen to it. Acknowledge it. work it out. Milk it. If there are things in there that are good, get it. Then I do something, I'm calling this a normalizing preface type of statement. And I find it works very well. I will usually say, this is really kind of the part of the mediation where I ask some very hard questions. And I want to let you know why I do that. I do that because it's part of my job is to help you think very carefully about what you should do here. I don't do that because I think you should do one thing or another, because I don't. I don't have any opinion about what you should do. None of what I say is personal. I don't want you to take it personally. I know these are going to be pretty tough questions. Please don't take them personally. Please know that I will go across the hall and I will hammer them just as hard as I hammer you. You can absolutely rest assured of that. I will ask them as many hard questions as I ask you. And I'm doing this to help you think carefully about what you want to do. And you'd be getting cheated if I didn't do it. And for purposes of this conversation, I would like you to just forget about them. Don't even think about the other side. We're talking about you and about what you need. And that's what I want to spend time doing with you. This is the setup piece. Sometimes I'll say to them, just so you know, I'm really going to stick the needle to you for about 20 minutes here. Just bear with me. This is just to help you. That's all it's for. Or I'll say, if you can get $1 million from these people, you go, girl. I don't mind. But we need to talk about what you can get. We need to talk very carefully and think very carefully about that. Preserve your neutrality. Let them know that you're working with them. This is about them. This is not personal. It's not meant to be nasty. It's not meant to tell them to do anything. It's not meant to tell them the case sucks. Nothing like that. Even though sometimes it does suck. Yeah. That's just the reality of the world. So I set it up with a statement like that. Really difficult clients, I'll tell my Wile E. Coyote story too. Have I told you folks my Wile E. Coyote story? Well, you know Wile E. Coyote, right? Chases the Roadrunner. And the Roadrunner runs right up to the edge of the cliff and does what? Stops on a dime. And poor Wile E. does what? Right over the edge of that cliff into a hole. Digs a hole for himself about 10 feet deep. And as he's climbing out of the hole, he's all broken and, brittle and dirty. And he looks up and the cliff just kind of breaks off and just falls flat on him and smashes him down another 10 feet, right? Now my job as a mediator is to make sure that my parties don't run off of that cliff before they even know what they've done. It's not to keep them from running off the cliff. Everybody is entitled to screw themselves if they want to do that and they know they're screwing themselves. It's just to make sure they don't do that without thinking about it. Now, if they still want to screw themselves, it's all fine and dandy with me. Right? But that's the gist of it. That's what you're going to do for them in the reality testing. You're going to keep them from becoming Wile E. Coyote unless that's what they want to do. And I have had clients who did. They want to jump off that cliff. Good. Now, what I said when I set it up by saying to them, forget them for a little while. Just talk about you. These are the things that I understand that you need. Is this what I'm understanding that you want? And there's that piece about being really clear about needs and interest and really having that hardwired. Because if you don't have that clear, you don't know what it is, you don't have it hardwired, you can't work for them from that approach. When I talk about reality testing with the grain, what I really mean is, this is your need and interest. This is you. This is what you want. Let's talk about how you're going to get it. Can you get it? How are you going to get it? If not, what can you get? How close can you come to it? What makes sense for you to do? Because if you go in there and you try to change your mind, you try to show them their case really sucks, you try to show them they're stupid, you try to show them they don't know what they're talking about, they're immoral, or they're whatever, that's reality testing against the grain. That's trying to make them do something. I just forget about that. I just say, this is what you want to do. right? Whatever blows smoke up your skirt's all right with me. This is what you want to do. Now, how are we going to do it?